Welcome back to the table, friends. I'm your humble host, Gray DMs, and with me as always is Owen.
Hi.
Tonight we gather around the table to have Owen once again bring a little bit of history and information about the game that he thinks we should all play.
Yeah, sorry, it's another Owen episode.
So some would argue the best episode.
Yeah, I don't think those people exist. But yeah, I've come to talk about actually two games, mainly the origin and the growth and development of a couple games that people may have heard of. One of them is called Pathfinder, and the other one is called Starfinder.
Ooh.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, these are probably the closest thing to a main competitor to D&D.
They're always on the list, yeah.
Yep, they're always on the list and relatively new. They have not been around for very long, where D&D's been around longer than most of us have been alive. So, yeah, let's start out. We're going to start out talking about Paizo. So, Paizo Publishing was founded in 2002 by Lisa Stevens, along with Vic Wirtz and Johnny Wilson. Stevens was already a veteran of the tabletop industry. She had been Wizards of the Coast full-time employee and had a hand in games like Ars Magica and Magic the Gathering.
I remember her.
Yep. When Wizards of the Coast decided to stop publishing its Dragon and Dungeon magazines and focus on core products, Stevens saw an opportunity. Paizo was formed to take over those beloved magazines, fueled by founders' passion to continue serving the RPG community. The name Paizo itself comes from the Greek word meaning I play, reflecting the company's playful mission. So starting in September 2002, Paizo began publishing Dragon magazine and Dungeon magazine under license. Johnny Wilson extensive magazine experience guided this phase, while Stevens' industry connections and Vic Wirt's operational support rounded out the team. In these early years, Paizo also experienced with other periodicals like Undefeated and Amazing Stories, though those saw limited success. The company faced financial growing pains. At one point, poor sales forced Paizo to cancel some magazines and lay off staff, a moment that Stevens recalls as devastating. People at Paizo are my friends. With just a few keystrokes on a spreadsheet, I was potentially destroying lives. I had to pull over to the side of the road and start bawling. This hardship steeled the team's resolve to find a sustainable path forward. They doubled down on what was working: adventure content for tabletop RPGs.
Yeah, it's always got to suck, right? Like if you build up a company with your friends and with people like you care about, like the first time, like hardcore business intrudes, and it's just like...
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, you get the feeling when I go further into this that these were people who were really passionate about what they were doing, and they're really happy about what they were doing, and the rug just got pulled out from underneath them. So Paizo's big breakthrough in the magazine era was the adventure path model. In Dungeon Magazine, editor-in-chief Eric Mona and his team introduced linked series of adventures such as A Shackled City that took characters from humble beginnings to epic conclusions over many installments. The response was nothing short of fantastic, Stevens noticed. These adventure paths were a hit with fans, creating ongoing storylines and drive consistent readership. Little did Paizo realize this format would later become the backbone of their business and our salvation in our most difficult time, they said. So, adventure paths. Let's talk about that a little bit. So, adventure paths were serialized campaigns published in Dungeon Magazine consisting of multiple linked adventures. They represented an innovative way of storytelling in tabletop RPGs, especially Dungeons and Dragons. I guess, actually, let's talk about Dragon and Dungeon Magazine first. So these were two monthly magazines that supported and expanded the popular role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. They served as companion publications aimed at enhancing players' and game masters' experience with regular content updates and advice. Both magazines were initially published independently by the company TSR and later by Wizards of the Coast after acquiring TSR. So these are two separate magazines. There's Dungeon Magazine and then there's Dragon Magazine. So Dragon Magazine launched in 1976, focused primarily on expanding the rules and options available to players and game masters. They provided articles about new character classes, spells, magic items, and monsters. Included articles on role-playing tips, storytelling advice, world-building inspiration, and fantasy fiction. Featured advice columns, fan-written material, and discussions about role-playing and storytelling. I think that's something that we take for granted now because we have such wide access to the internet and forums and
Yeah. So, because for many of our listeners who are in our age bracket, like we are the generation that bridges that divide.
yeah.
And it is weird because, like, if you think back to like our early days playing video games,
Oh,
we
absolutely.
can kind of see the analogy, like all the like going to school and hearing the rumors about how to do stuff, or having to like call Nintendo Power to try to figure out what the cheat code is.
I mean, you might have called Nintendo Power, but I wasn't allowed to make any calls that cost money.
No, neither was I. my dad would have like castrated me if I had. Trust me, that would not have been a good thing in my old house.
But yeah, a lot of people, some of the younger viewers, listeners might not realize like Nintendo Power was a huge thing back in the day. Like literally when a new game came out, a Nintendo Power release was done that corresponded with, hey, here's some secrets about something, here's a secret passage, here's a piece of equipment that you might not know about. They had cheat codes and stuff mixed in there along with advice and columns and yeah.
The freaking that movie, The Wizard.
Yeah.
You get to see the level skip for Mario 3.
Right.
That was how we learned that.
Yeah,
like,
nobody really knew about it.
Like you basically had like two avenues besides you just hammering through a game. One of them was you would listen around or talk around to find
somebody else, somebody found something.
Like so-and-so's older brother knows the cheat code for whatever or whatever. And the other one was these publications or these magazines or like TV shows, because I remember for a while that was a thing too. And, they'd be like, oh, it's a cartoon, and then they go into a little tip or something after that.
Yeah.
There was one of them too where you could play through your phone.
God, I don't remember that.
Yeah, so it was like they had like this challenge, and it was like, all right, everybody get on the phone, and then some lucky listener would go through, and they would use their touch tone phone to control it. It never worked.
Yeah.
Like they always died.
Yeah.
But like I was always like, oh my God, this is the future.
This is the future.
But yes, the point we're getting at is that information was at a premium.
Yeah, like I actually remember a point in time, I couldn't tell you what game it was, but at the time, me and all my friends at school were playing it, and one kid knew a secret code or, a secret area, and he wouldn't tell anybody. Because no, he earned that information, and, everybody else had to figure out on their own, and it was kind of like this thing, it's just like he knows how to get the secret skip. Whoa, no way.
That's we won't derail too long, but like that's one of the components that I think a lot of older people have, is that loss of experiences being unique. Now everything's shared, but there was that thing where you're like, oh, Mom, Dad, I have to go over to so-and-so's house because he rented this game and we're going to beat it in one night. And that's the only way I'm going to see it get beat.
Think about how many games you've started out now where it's just like, I have to go look up the optimal build and how to do this. You can't just go play the game.
Yeah. Interesting.
Like early World of Warcraft was like that, where I was just like, hey, I want to go be a druid. And it wasn't like, why are you going to be a druid? There, at the time when World of Warcraft first started, druids were awful. And it's like, why do you want to go be a druid? It's like, I want to be able to turn into stuff. It's like, well, that's cool. That's literally all it was.
The whole reason I picked a shaman was I couldn't figure out. I thought the totems were a secondary job class.
Oh, like a profession?
A profession. I was like, what's the profession where you get the totems? So like, no, that's a shaman. I was like, oh. Anyway,
yeah, it's a segue. So that was Dragon Magazine. Dungeon Magazine launched in 1986. This magazine primarily focused on providing ready-to-play adventures or scenarios for game masters. Published self-contained stories or adventures that GMs could directly use in their games, significantly reducing preparation time for game sessions. So that's what the the two magazines were. And within those magazines, you had the Adventure Pass. So the Adventure Pass were typically consisted of 6 to 12 adventures. Mind you, this is in a monthly publication. So you're getting every month, you're getting a new part of this adventure. Each building directly upon the previous one. Each issue of Dungeon Magazine included one chapter, so subscribers could gradually play through the unfolding story. Characters typically started at level 1 of the adventure, progressively becoming more challenging. By the final installment, characters might reach very high levels, like 15 to 20. The first significant adventure path was the Shackled City in 2003 and 2004. It spanned 12 issues and took characters from level 1 through approximately level 20. The path had players investigating kidnappings beneath a mysterious city built atop a dormant volcano. Some of the most famous ones, we already mentioned Shackled City. There's Age of Worms and Savage Tide. So these are all, if you can find them, they're adventures that are not in a book that you can buy at, Amazon or eBay or wherever. Like, these are things that you have to pick up and get that way. So in 2002 is when all of this started. And as an initial 5-year magazine license neared its end, Paizo hoped it would be renewed. By 2006, Dungeons & Dragons were thriving, circulation was up, and fan acclaim was high. Mainly because of these adventure paths, this thing that Paizo thought up themselves. Stevens and Mona felt confident in a renewal with subscriptions on the rise. There seemed little reason to concern, Stevens said. However, behind the scenes, Wizards of the Coast was charting a different course. Wizards of the Coast planned to shift D&D entirely to a digital strategy, a forthcoming D&D Insider service, as part of launching a new 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. That meant ending the print magazine. In 2006, Paizo got the call. I keep calling it Paizo, I can't help it. Paizo got the call. Their magazine license would not be renewed. Lisa Stevens was heartbroken. After the call, I brought Eric to my office and told him the news, tears streaming down my face. This news struck us to the core, she later recounted. It truly felt like the ground was shifting under Paizo's feet. The core business they had built up was about to vanish. To their credit, Wizards of the Coast gave Paizo an extended heads up, several months more notice than the contract required, and even allowed the magazines to run through August 2007, because they were currently working on the Savage Tide adventure path. Stevens acknowledged that Wizards of the Coast consideration and handling the transition likely gave us the ability to both plan and execute a strategy for survival. Paizo suddenly had a lifeline to reinvent itself rather than shut its doors. So, determined to keep their team together and continue delivering stories to fans, Paizo quickly devised a plan. They would launch a new monthly publication to replace Dragon and Dungeon magazine, and they called it the Pathfinder Adventure Path. This new series would be wholly Paizo-owned, set in a fresh world of their own creation, the world of Golarion. But crucially, it would still use D&D 3.5 rules under the open game license, so that existing players could easily adopt it. To transition the company, we needed all hands on deck, Eric Mona explained, of this all or nothing pivot. In August 2007, Paizo debuted the first issue of Pathfinder, The Rise of the Rune Lords Adventure Path. The gamble worked. Sales of Pathfinder Adventure Path were strong, and many subscribers of the old magazine converted over to the new Paizo product. Paizo had successfully navigated away from the iceberg, at least for the moment. Their relief, though, was short-lived. At Gen Con 2007, Wizards of the Coast dropped another bombshell. Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition was on the way, to be released in 2008. This announcement cast a shadow on Paizo's plan. The Pathfinder series and their products like modules were built on D&D 3.5 rules, which Wizards was now replacing. But the audience moved to 4th edition and leave behind 3.5. Paizo suddenly faced the prospect that all their current products could become obsolete in a year's time. They were at a crossroads.
Sorry.
He's laughing because
knowing we know, it's just, it's like they're like, oh my gosh, look at that person.
4th edition.
That person's putting a gun to their temple. Will this mean doom for me?
But at the time, they didn't know it was a gun.
It makes perfect sense. But just like in hindsight, it's like, oh, jeez.
Yeah, for those who don't know, for those who didn't play 4th edition, you didn't miss a whole lot. It wasn't around for long. Player base dropped considerably, and we'll talk about that some more.
Yeah.
But 5th edition was rushed out. Pretty much, they...
Well, so 5th edition...
I don't mean it was rushed as in rushed. I should say it was... We need to get 5th edition now.
5th edition was like a response to, so I'm sure we'll go on this later, but like 4th edition made a run.
It did.
But like the company started dropping out and they were letting people off.
Yeah.
And they got down to like a core group, and that group was like, okay, they're like, you're all that has this access to this property now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you going to do with it? And that group was like, we have to figure this out. So let's start playtesting things.
Yes.
And the D&D Next,
Yep.
which is what we play tested. That's what led into 5th edition. That's one of the reasons why it did so well. And like, I still have those early packets of us running around and a certain wizard blowing bugbears and all the craziness that happened there. Blowing up bugbears.
I know. I was waiting for you to.
Sorry.
That was. I don't remember that particular game, Gray. Can you tell me about it?
It was a weird game. A weird game of Caves of Chaos. Sorry, but yeah, let's keep going.
In late 2007 or early 2008, Paizo's team wrestled with how to respond to D&D 4th edition. Initially, they tried to keep a foot in both worlds. Paizo leadership stayed in communication with Wizards of the Coast, hoping to get early info on 4th edition or a third-party license that would allow Paizo to produce official 4th edition compatible products. Wizards indicated that some kind of third-party license was in the works. Don't worry about it. But details and timing were vague. Paizo couldn't afford to wait indefinitely with no RPG to support their world. Meanwhile, Paizo's Jason Bullman, developer and adventure author, suddenly found himself with free time as Wizards of the Coast stopped outsourcing 3.5 edition design work, ramping up their initial 4th edition development. As a fun side project, he began tinkering with a 3.75 rule set, refining and house ruling D&D 3.5 for his own amusement. Little did he know, his document would soon become incredibly important. By 2008, the clock had run out. The lack of firm commitment of any kind of schedule from Wizard had stretched our patience and our deadlines, Stephen wrote of that period. In January 2008, Paizo called a company summit to decide their future. They spent a day debating options from embracing 4th edition to sticking with 3.5 unofficially. Bullman eventually spoke up about his homemade 3.5 draft. The idea caught fire. By the end of the meeting, Bullman was tapped as lead designer of a potential Pathfinder role-playing game, codenamed Mon Mothma.
Nice Star Wars reference.
Yeah. It was a bold and risky move. Essentially, Paizo would create their own version of D&D, extending the life of the 3.5 rule set that their customers love. As Stevens later put it, we were beginning to think that forging our own path forward might be a valid choice. To make the final call, Paizo sent Jason Bullman to D&D Experience convention in February 2008, where attendees would preview 4th edition D&D. His mission? Play 4th edition, learn everything he could, and report back on whether this new system was something Paizo could see itself embracing. When Bullman returned, the answer was clear. The team's misgivings about 4th edition were confirmed. It was a very different game, not the natural evolution of 3.5 that many of their fans wanted. 4th edition didn't look like the system we wanted to make products for, Stevens concluded. Whether a license for 4th edition was forthcoming or not, we were going to create our own game system based on the 3.5 SRD, the Pathfinder role-playing game. With that decision, Paizo formally broke away from D&D's shadow and set to build Pathfinder as a full-fledged standalone RPG. It was, as one commenter noted at the time, the boldest move you'll likely see in the world of professional RPGs this year. I don't know, Cotton. You think it'll pan out?
We'll have to see.
Crucially, Paizo was able to do this without violating Wizards of the Coast intellectual property thanks to the open game license. The OGL, created by Wizards of the Coast back in 2000, allowed third-party publishers to use the core mechanics of D&D 3rd edition and its system reference document content freely. Paizo had already been publishing OGL material for years in its magazine and Adventure Pass. Now it leveraged that license fully to carry D&D 3.5's mechanics forward under a new name. On March 18th, 2008, Paizo officially announced the Pathfinder role-playing game, saying it would modify and update the 3.5 edition system reference document under the terms of Wizards of the Coast open game license. In other words, Pathfinder RPG would be backwards compatible with D&D 3.5, offering a living home for that rule set, even as Wizards of the Coast moved on to 4th edition. There were some legal caveats. Paizo couldn't use trademark terms or closed content IP from D&D. For example, they couldn't call monsters beholders or use the Dungeons & Dragons name. But the game mechanics themselves, the engine of D&D D20 rules, were open for use. There was no serious legal challenge from Wizards of the Coast, as the OGL made Paizo's move legitimate. Though it's safe to assume that Wizards didn't anticipate a former partner turning the open license into a platform for competition. A Wizards of the Coast designer later remarked on the change in policy from 3E to 4E, saying, "Legal opinions change, legal staffs change." Wizards of the Coast new leadership chose not to offer an open license for 4th edition, but they couldn't undo the open license that was already out in the world. Paizo's choice not to sign on to Wizards' new gaming licenses for 4th edition, which was far more restricted, was pivotal. The GSL would have barred them from publishing 3.5 base materials alongside 4th edition content, which was a deal breaker. So Paizo went all in on Pathfinder. They rolled out a massive public playtest, the Pathfinder RPG beta, in mid-2008, inviting feedback from the community to refine the rules. Thousands of gamers participated, helping Paizo tweak class balance, refine systems like combat maneuvers, and generally polish the game. This open development process not only improved the final product, but built tremendous goodwill and hype. By the time Pathfinder was ready to launch, Paizo had a passionate fan base eagerly awaiting. So in August 2009, Paizo released the Pathfinder role-playing game core rulebook. The timing was fortuitous. D&D 4th edition had been out for about a year, and while it had its fans, many in the community preferred the depth of D&D 3.5 and hadn't migrated to 4th edition. Pathfinder was perfectly positioned to capture those players. The core rulebook, a 576-page tome, effectively combined and updated the old 3.5 Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide into one volume, with adjustments to streamlining some of 3.5's complexities. It introduced the world to Golarion, Paizo's own campaign setting, but was modular enough that people could play classic fantasy adventures of any sort. Pathfinder was often nicknamed D&D 3.75, a nod to its lineage as a midpoint between D&D 3.5 and what 4th edition could have been. For Paizo, it was essential that Pathfinder feel similar to seasoned D&D players, yet stand on its own merits. So, I mean, yeah, I don't see any problem here.
It's that thing of like, you know, you're coming around the last bend of the race, and you're driving and you're like, oh man, first place, look at him, he's just sprinting ahead. Oh, like he just hit the nos. He's like blinding past me. Like, oh man, like why does he have to rub it in? There's nothing I'm gonna do. Oh look, he took a left turn. Oh, he's on fire. Oh, everybody's screaming and wondering, I'm first place then. You know, like like in retrospect, it was such because
we had high hopes for 4th edition.
Well, yeah, I mean, we bought it. I bought into it. So, to give a little reference here, and I'm sure a lot of people listen to us whine about stuff like that, probably have their own experience. But like when we got into RPGs, we got into White Wolf.
Yep.
And so you would go at that time to Barnes and Noble or like Walton Books, and you would have like the one shelf of like RPG books. And typically you had the big tomes of 3 or 3.5, like, and it made it look like it was a tome, and it had all the fancy kind of gimmicky,
embellishments.
Yeah. And then you had like the White Wolf section, which was growing, and that's where we would peruse. And like that was it. You had sandwiched between 3rd 3.5 D&D, which was this thing that we contended with in a game, but not on paper yet.
Yeah, we played a video game for a while that used all of D&D's 3.5 rules.
We unintentionally taught ourselves everything about it to understand that game. But like, yeah, you had that set up for a long time. So then after things happened, and I can't remember. Oh, I no. So one day, I think we were living together here.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to the Penny Arcade playtest of 4th edition.
Yeah.
And that was like very smart. Wizard of the Coast was very smart about that, where they were like, hey, we need someone like still 10 years pitching too early, but they're like, we need to take some famous people, have them play this. They're going to put them out there. And I was just kind of like, oh, this is like the new, hey, like we're all playing World of Warcraft. And like, oh, you've got these like at will powers and this daily powers and this encounter powers. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of crazy. It's like, yeah, so like, why don't we just start buying all the books?
That was a bit of a surprise because when we heard like, oh, hey, we're going to try 4th edition, we're like, sweet. And then we showed up and you're like, here's the tome, here's all the cards. Like that was a new concept.
Yeah, like some binders and certain individuals with like all those. Anyway, yeah, like I still have most of those cards. For people who have played 4th, I don't know if you want to talk about this more or not, but like 4th edition basically was a mathematically engineered board game experience. And it was but like that's what it was.
Yeah.
It was much more like Gloomhaven or like it was like it was very finely balanced to like give you all the tools you needed to like basically make sure that everybody had action economy, agency, and all this stuff. Was it random or feeling right?
No, and it very much kind of pigeonholed you into playing your class a particular way because that was how the rules were written.
Yeah, like I remember the experience that like really hammered in that I didn't like it was they came out with like the Dungeon Master's Guide, and they came out the Dungeon Master's Guide 2. They came out the Player's Handbook and the Player's Handbook 2 and the Player's Handbook 3. And I remember the Player's Handbook 3 was the one that like really came out where they were like, oh, we're going into, I think the second one was where they introduced all the natural classes. So they were like, oh, like here's a fighter. And they're like, the divine version of a fighter is a paladin. And like the natural version of a fighter is like this, the warlord or whatever. But it was like the psionic one. I think we used the third one. And they're like, it's this warlord class who objectively, like the lore and the like the idea of the warlord was fantastic. Loved it. But then I started looking at all the abilities they got, and all their abilities were exactly mechanically the dice and the weapons and the damage of every other class.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's just a system they nailed.
Yeah, they just copied and pasted everything and called it something different.
So, like, if you rolled your sneak attack as a rogue, you were basically rolling your fireball as a wizard or your, like, daily hammer strike as a paladin, and it was all the same. And I was like, oh, no, I don't like any of this. Like, this whole thing just got, like, chewed up. And so the end result of that was you had a bunch of people that were kind of disenfranchised, and they had a system that was marketed as being more modern and MMO-like and being more like, oh, this is updated to modern sensibilities. And what did they do? They're like, well, we want to go back and do what we did before. Oh, somebody's moving that forward.
Yeah.
Dump all the money. So, like, by the time we went around and, like, we ditched D&D, there was a period of time it felt like 10 years, but it probably wasn't, where nobody played D&D.
Yeah.
If you ask people, they're like, oh, yeah, I play D&D on the weekends. Well, actually, we play Pathfinder.
Yeah.
And, like, that was so firmly ingrained in, like, the talk was everybody was like, I mean, Critical Role. Like, they started playing Pathfinder. Like, that was the game they played, and they don't talk about it because when they went on stream, they, like, corrected to D&D so they could deal with the companies and, you know, make the smart financial decisions. But that was what happened, was just nobody played D&D anymore. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a crazy time. So back in 2009, this is when they launched the core rulebook. It was a smash success. First print run of the core rulebook sold out in a matter of weeks. surprising many who had underestimated demand for a non-Wizards fantasy RPG. Paizo differentiated Pathfinder from D&D by both small mechanical improvements and big cultural shifts. Mechanically, they tweaked underpowered classes, for example, Rangers and Bards got boosts, consolidated skills, and made the game less reliant on multi-classing feats, essentially fine-tuning rather than overhauling the 3.5 rules. Culturally, Paizo made Pathfinder inclusive of the community in its development and continued to prioritize adventure storytelling through its monthly adventure path releases as the heart of the game. The result was a game that felt like a continuation of classic D&D. As Paizo's chief creative officer, Eric Mona, said, they wanted Pathfinder to carry forward the high fantasy tradition in which their team had decades of experience. Throughout 2010 and 2011, the Pathfinder RPG line expanded rapidly. Paizo released hardcover rulebooks, supplements, bestiaries, and dozens of standalone adventures.
Many of which were hardcore.
Yeah, very hardcore. Hardcore bestiaries. They also launched the Pathfinder Society organized play program alongside the beta, grew in 2009, which created a worldwide community of players all sharing the same campaign scenarios. This network of game masters and players at hobby stores and conventions helped Pathfinder grow its fan base from grassroots. By 2011, the momentum was unmistakable. Pathfinder RPG was not only a success, it became the top-selling tabletop RPG in the industry, outselling Dungeons & Dragons itself for a time. Industry tracking by sources like ICV2 reported that Pathfinder was the best-selling RPG from 2011 until the middle of 2014. This was a historic upset. D&D had been the undisputed market leader for decades. Paizo, a small company held by fans, had leapfrogged the giant. Wizards of the Coast employees would privately dispute whether Pathfinder truly eclipsed D&D sales in absolute terms, but there's no doubt Pathfinder was enormously popular, filling big convention halls with players while D&D 4E's audience waned. For context, by late in D&D's 4th edition cycle, 2010 to 2012, many players had grown disenfranchised with 4th edition's drastic changes. It felt more like a tactical miniature game to some. Pathfinder offered a robust alternative with a deep library of adventures and familiarity of 3rd edition D&D. Gamers had a clear source: stick with the new D&D or jump to Pathfinder's refined version of the old rules. As D&D designer Andy Collins observed, having two distinct games was actually healthy. I think it's better to have games that are more distinct. That gives people clear choices. And indeed, the hobby now has two thriving fantasy RPGs, each with their own style. A big part of Pathfinder's success was Paizo's community-driven approach. They maintained active forums where designers interacted with fans daily. They invited playtest feedback and incorporated it, making players feel a sense of ownership in the game. Key Paizo staff like Jason Bullman was the lead designer, and James Jacobs, the creative director, and F. Wesley Schneider, editor-in-chief, became minor celebrities in the RPG world, beloved for their passions and approachability. Paizo also made a point to put quality and fun first. Famously, they kept a sense of humor and inclusivity in their products, for instance, including quirky goblin songs in one supplement or featuring iconic characters of diverse genders and ethnics in their artwork. All of this built a brand loyalty that went beyond the rules page. By 2013, Pathfinder had won numerous awards, including multiple Emmy Awards for Product of the Year, and had a robust product catalog. Paizo wasn't just a magazine publisher anymore. They were a leading RPG publisher with their own universe. They even partnered to create a Pathfinder adventure card game launched in 2013, which translated the RPG's characters and adventures into a cooperative card-based format. Pathfinder novels, the Pathfinder Tales line, also appeared, further fleshing out the world of Golarion. Paizo was firing on all cylinders, but the competitive landscape was about to shift once again as the RPG behemoth woke from its slumber.
Yeah, that playtest for D&D Next.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't like that was when we made like chili dogs and we had everybody come out. You remember? Yeah, the Caves of Chaos. Like that was because like the biggest criticism about 5th edition was we were just like their 4th edition was like your character abilities say, oh, this is 2 squares away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, you knew a square meant whatever, but like it just felt like that thing. And 5th edition right off the bat was just like, let's just go back to like old school D&D.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and let's try to make things simple. And here's this concept of bounded accuracy that's going to keep everything tight and it's going to basically keep you on ship for 10 years. And we're like, oh, this feels good.
Oh, so 2014, Wizards of the Coast released Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, a new iteration of D&D that sought to unite the fan base and address criticisms of 4th edition. The launch of 5e was a huge success for Wizards of the Coast. It brought many lapsed players back to D&D with its mix of old school feel and modern rules. Naturally, this had an effect on Pathfinder's position. By the end of 2014, D&D was reclaiming the number 1 spot in sales, and Pathfinder settled back into the number 2 fantasy RPG. Paizo continued to do well, but the days of Pathfinder outselling D&D were coming to an end as the market expanded and 5e's popularity surged. From 2015 onward, Pathfinder and D&D 5e essentially led a very healthy RPG market, with Pathfinder typically second best-selling RPG line. Paizo's response to 5e's rise was to keep innovating and diversifying. They knew Pathfinder's first edition had a loyal audience and an enormous catalog, so they supported it fully, but they also explored new opportunities. One venture, and arguably a misstep, was Pathfinder Online, a massively multiplayer online RPG product. Paizo partnered with a startup called Goblin Works, in which Paizo CEO Lisa Stevens and Vic Wertz were involved, along with Ryan Dancy, a former Wizard of the Coast VP who had been instrumental in creating the OGL. The idea was to create a sandbox-style MMO RPG set in Golarion. In 2013, a Pathfinder Online Kickstarter campaign raised over $1 million from fans eager to see an online version of the Pathfinder experience. However, game development proved challenging. The project moved into a very limited beta by 2014 to 2015, but progress was slow and the game never reached a full polished release. Goblin Works ran out of funding and laid off most of its staff. Paizo tried to keep the project on life support for a while. Lisa Stevens even wrote extensive letters to backers in 2016 through 2017, explaining roadmaps and seeking niche angles for completion. But it wasn't enough. Ultimately, in November 2021, Pathfinder Online was shut down for good, after years of dwindling player interest in its unfinished state. This MMORPG attempt is often cited as a notable setback, poor business decision by Paizo, a case of reaching too far outside their core competency. While it didn't bankrupt the company or anything so dire, it did consume time and resources that might have gone into Paizo's tabletop offerings. In hindsight, it was a learning experience about the perils of video game development. On a more positive note, Paizo found success in the digital realm through licensing. Video game studios like Obsidian Entertainment and Owlcat Games picked up the Pathfinder license and produced well-received computer RPGs like Pathfinder Kingmaker 2018. These weren't developed by Paizo directly, but they expanded Pathfinder's reach to new audiences. By 2016, Paizo was already contemplating their next big thing, Starfinder. This began to take shape internally as Paizo's developers considered creating a science fiction companion to Pathfinder. James L. Sutter, who had been a key world builder for a Pathfinder setting, along with other Paizo designers, were avid sci-fi fans and saw an untapped potential in space fantasy RPG. Pathfinder's rules could be adapted. After all, D&D in space existed in forms like Star Wars RPGs or Spelljammer, but there was no modern mainstream RPG doing science fantasy at the scale Paizo imagined. Additionally, the team wanted to challenge themselves and show that Paizo could do more than just fantasy. In May 2016, Paizo officially announced the development of Starfinder role-playing game to the excitement of fans and industry watchers. Starfinder was envisioned as an alternate future of the Pathfinder universe. Essentially, if you took Paizo's fantasy world and advanced it thousands of years into a spacefaring age, the game would feature starships, alien planets, lasers, and technology, alongside magic, gods, and fantasy races. It was a true hybrid of genres, often described as science fantasy. James Sutter served as Starfinder's creative director, leading the creative team in crafting this new setting. They decided that in Starfinder's future, the planet Golarion, the heart of the Pathfinder setting, had mysteriously vanished. A clever lore move that gave them freedom to write new stories without contradicting Pathfinder campaigns. We wanted to remove Golarion from the picture. The planet has disappeared and the gods say it's safe, but won't say where it is, Sutter explained. so that players wouldn't feel like the Pathfinder storyline was all predetermined in Starfinder's future. This plot device, called the Gap, added intrigue and kept the two settings distinct. On the rules side, Starfinder was built on a modified Pathfinder chassis, essentially the D20 system with tweaks. The design team streamlined some of the crunchier parts of Pathfinder and introduced new mechanics for things like starship combat and high-tech gear. They also had to balance how magic would coexist with technology. It was a challenge to ensure the game felt like Pathfinder, but also stood on its own with a freshened identity. Paizo did extensive playtesting and iteration to get it right. Starfinder debuted at Gen Con in August 2017, and it was an immediate blockbuster. The Starfinder core rulebook sold out within the first 6 hours of release, a record for Paizo, in fact. It became the fastest selling product of Paizo's history. Long lines of fans waited to snag a copy, and by the end of the convention, not a single Starfinder book was left at Paizo's booth. Demand far outstripped supply. The company had to rush reprints. The response to Starfinder has been truly incredible, said James Stutter after the launch. From the fans on social media to distributors, the enthusiasm for Starfinder has carried forward past Gen Con, and it's deeply gratifying to see so many people enjoy it, he said. Reviews praise Starfinder for its imaginative setting, a solar system with highlights like Absalon Station, a space station city, Star Knights called the Hell Knights, undead alien civilizations, and so on, and for making the crunchier Pathfinder rules work in a new context. Starfinder won several awards, including ENnie Awards for Best Game and Product of the Year 2018. It proved Paizo could successfully expand beyond fantasy. Commercially, Starfinder gave Paizo a second strong product line. In fact, there were times in 2017 to 2018 where Starfinder books occupied the number 2 slot in industry sales charts right behind D&D, temporarily even outselling Pathfinder's own books. The game tapped into a crowd that loved both RPGs and sci-fi, and it had little direct competition. Starfinder's success also broadened Paizo's community. You'd see Starfinder organize gameplay, Starfinder Society, alongside Pathfinder Society at conventions. And some players who weren't as interested in medieval fantasy found a home in Starfinder's universe instead. With Starfinder's triumph, Paizo in 2017 had 2 major RPG systems under its umbrella. They continued releasing adventure paths for Starfinder and supporting it vigorously, while also maintaining a full Pathfinder publication schedule. It was an ambitious period, arguably the height of Paizo's growth. However, running 2 parallel RPGs is a lot for any company, and Paizo's staff was certainly busy keeping up with it all. By this time, Paizo had around 80-plus employees, still relatively small compared to the juggernaut of Wizards of the Coast, but quite large for an indie publisher. Even as Starfinder was taking off, Paizo's team was looking back at their flagship game, Pathfinder, which by 2018 had been around for a decade. Pathfinder First Edition had seen countless expansions and incremental rule additions over the years, which inevitably led to rules bloat and some power creep. Both fans and Paizo's designers recognized that there were areas the system could be refined and modernized. Additionally, the market reality was that D&D 5th Edition's simpler, more newcomer-friendly rules were drawing many new players, whereas Pathfinder's complexity could be daunting for beginners. Paizo had a reputation for crunch-heavy games. Perhaps a new edition could strike a better balance and incorporate lessons learned. Yeah, so if anybody's played 3.5, I mean, they know the compendium that is the player's handbook and creating a character and feats, abilities.
Yeah.
You literally can make a character that's useless.
Oh, quite easily.
Mm-hmm.
And the DM can make a monster that is basically like unkillable.
Yeah, absolutely.
The complexity. I mean, like, I think Neverwinter Nights, the game, was a good example of that. Yeah. Where, like, basically, if you played the story, almost any character you could kind of get working because it didn't. But, like, if you played on something where there was, like, a server that they had to try to balance things on, because of the ability for you to just mathematically come up with a build that was devastating.
Multi-class into warrior every time.
Yeah. They had to like balance the thing against you. So like it was impossible to just do a normal class.
Yeah, the server that we played on for a long time, they actually had to buff pure class builds because the multi-class builds just outstripped everything.
Yeah, it was just like there were those kind of dips, kind of like in 5th edition where like you take a dip into Warlock or a dip into something, but like it was the problem was compounded exponentially, like because there were just certain things that were so important, and like even in what you said earlier, where like that was part of what they addressed when they made Pathfinder was they saw that like 3.5 was kind of like it did that, but like they corrected. They didn't like go the full fix until possibly later on, and that's where 5th edition shined. It was like, hey, you can get into the weeds, but like if you just roll mediocre stats, your character will still do stuff.
Yeah,
and like that just was so easier to get people to sit at the table.
So in May 2018, Paizo announced that it was working on Pathfinder 2nd Edition, aiming to refine elements of the rule set based on feedback and years of experience with the original. They published a comprehensive Pathfinder playtest rulebook in 2018, essentially a prototype of 2nd Edition, and invited gamers worldwide to test it out. This playtest was extensive, running for many months, and accompanied by surveys and forums for player feedback, similar to what Wizards of the Coast had done with D&D 5th edition. By the end of the process, Paizo had gathered a ton of data to help shape the final game. Pathfinder 2nd edition launched at Gen Con in August 2019, almost exactly 10 years after the 1st edition's debut. The new edition kept the spirit of Pathfinder, tactical depth, customization, and rich character options, but it introduced a host of changes. Notably, it used a streamlined action economy. Every character gets 3 actions on their turn, making combat more fluid. It also built in scalability so that high-level play remained balanced, addressing 1E's tendency for high-level characters to become unwieldy. Another differentiation was the sheer breadth of character customization from 1 to 2. Pathfinder 2nd edition introduced the concept of ancestry and background choices alongside class, giving more roleplay flavor and mechanical variety to characters that from the start. By all accounts, Pathfinder 2nd edition was a well-redesigned evolution. Critics and core fans received it positively for its innovation and polish. Refinement truly was the goal, and Paizo largely achieved that, even if it meant some beloved quirks of 1st edition were left behind. That said, launching a new edition is always a delicate dance. Some longtime Pathfinder 1E players were deeply invested in the existing system with its mountains of content, and not everyone was eager to switch. Paizo committed to continue selling 1st edition PDFs and even allowed the community to continue organizing play for 1st edition on a limited basis, but their primary focus shifted to 2nd edition. Pathfinder 2nd edition got off to a strong start, but it did not dethrone D&D, nor was it really expected to. Instead, Pathfinder 2nd edition secured Paizo's place in the hobby by providing a company that wasn't afraid to change and push the state of the art in the game design. Over 2019 and into 2020, Paizo released a steady cadence of 2nd edition products: the Lost Omens World Guide, New Adventure Paths, and the Advanced Player's Guide, all building out the last edition, or the current edition. Around this time, Paizo's internal leadership saw a change in the guard. By 2019, Paizo had been in business 17 years, and Lisa Stevens, the founder and CEO, was looking ahead to retirement. She had often mentioned a plan of working roughly 20 years with Paizo. In June 2020, Paizo announced that Stevens would step back from day-to-day operations, transitioning the company's leadership to a new team as part of the planned retirement. Longtime Paizo director Jeffrey Alvarez was promoted to president of the company, and Lisa would remain CEO during a transition period focused on high-level strategy. In her announcement, Lisa reflected on Paizo's journey. When I started Paizo 18 years ago, I had a vague idea that I might work around 20 more years before retiring. I feel that it's time for me to formally acknowledge these changes. I'm now officially stepping back from the day-to-day running of Paizo. She handed the reins to the team she'd empowered for years: Eric Mona, publisher, chief creative officer; Jeff Alvarez, the president, and other department heads took over the daily management. Lisa's husband, Vic Wirtz, Paizo's chief technical officer and another co-founder, also began stepping away from active duty around this time. This was a major milestone. The original leadership was preparing to pass the torch, even as Paizo entered a new era with its 2nd edition game. Little did Paizo know, even bigger changes were on the horizon in the next year, not just for the company, but globally. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 would impact the tabletop industry. Paizo, like others, had to adapt to remote work and virtual conventions, but amidst those challenges, another internal shakeup was brewing. This is actually pretty huge. So in 2021, Paizo encountered a wave of controversy regarding its workplace environment, a turning point that would lead to unprecedented action by its employees. Tensions came to a head in September 2021 when two well-known Paizo staff members were suddenly no longer with the company. Community manager Sarah Marie was fired, and customer service rep Diego Valdez, her partner, resigned shortly after in solidarity. These departures and the way they were handled raised concerns among other employees and freelancers. Almost immediately, numerous former and current Paizo staff spoke out on social media and forums, alleging deeper problems at the company. They described issues ranging from overwork and low pay to instances of managerial misconduct. Accounts surfaced of inconsistent hiring practices, pay inequity, verbal abuse by executive, and allegations of harassment ignored or covered up by those at the top. In short, what had been whispers in the past became public discussion. Paizo might be a fun company making games, but internally employees were struggling with a toxic work culture. The tabletop RPG community watched as these revelations unfolded. Paizo's executives responded with statements promising to address issues. They brought in an independent investigator to review harassment allegations and vowed to improve workplace conditions. However, Paizo staff had already begun organizing. In the wake of the controversy, over 30 employees from various departments came together to form the United Paizo Workers, a labor union affiliated with the Communications Workers of America. On October 14th, 2021, they went public with a unionization effort, a first in the history of tabletop role-playing game companies. In their open letter, the employees stated that while they had been organized quietly for some time, these recent events galvanized the need for collective action. They cited being underpaid for their labor, required to live in one of the most expensive cities in the U.S., and subjected to untenable crunch conditions on a regular basis. They also made it clear that promised internal changes were not enough without workers having a seat at the table. The only way to ensure that all workers' voices are heard is collective action. The union announcement was met with an outpouring of support from fans, freelance creators, and others in the industry. Remarkably, Paizo's management moved quickly to respond. By late October 2021, Paizo's leadership voluntarily recognized the union, avoiding a potential lengthy and contentious certification battle. This meant Paizo officially became a unionized company and the first of its kind. The decision to reorganize was likely influenced by the public pressure and even a brief freelancer strike where freelancers, writers, and artists halted work in solidarity. But it has also shown Paizo was willing to take a new direction in its corporate culture. The formation of United Paizo Workers was a watershed moment. It signaled to the industry that even small to mid-sized publishers could unionize and that workers in creative fields wanted a stronger voice. For Paizo, the immediate outcome was starting collective bargaining talks to secure better working conditions, clear anti-harassment policies, and more equitable pay structures. Over 2022, those negotiations and reforms would continue, with employees gaining things like wage increases and improved benefits. The long-term impact is still unfolding, but Paizo's reputation, which took a hit from the controversy, also gained a measure of respect for being the company where RPG union movement began. In May 2022, representatives of United Paizo Workers were even invited to the White House as part of a labor meeting with President Biden, highlighting how significant their union was beyond just the gaming sphere. Throughout this period, Paizo's game production never halted. New Pathfinder and Starfinder books kept coming out, but internally, 2021 was clearly a year of reflection and change for the company. Many saw this as a necessary evolution for Paizo to continue thriving in the long run, treating the people behind the games with the same respect and care they had for the player community. So yeah, unionized Wizards of the Coast.
Dude. So, going back to our analogy, so, like, not only did you you sit there and watch your team in first place crash into a wall and light on fire, and the second place team cross the line, but then you watch the second place team get out a gun and start shooting their, their critics, and you're like, uh-oh, why are you doing that?
Well, it kind of goes back to that whole thing where it's just like nobody's a good guy. Like any business is a business. Its purpose is to make money. You think back to Google back in the day, or it's like their slogan, don't be evil.
Yeah.
And look at them now.
They took it down. I was
Yeah.
so like, why did you take it down? That should have been just an easy thing to leave up.
We felt it would be hypocritical to leave it up.
Yeah, I think it always goes down to the site that there are good and bad people. There is no good business in people. Like
Right.
when people are running the company, good people are running the company, and the company is successful. It's like great companies to work at, but like when those start disappearing, whether the pressure economically affects the company or the good people start leaving, that's when all this stuff happens.
Well, it's the whole shareholder principle where every year there has to be the number must go up.
Squeeze.
It's like every year you are making a profit.
Yeah.
Does it matter that the number has to go up every year? And for some reason, yes. So it's like,
well, and yeah, there's a whole like big discussion about the economics of that and why that's unsustainable.
Absolutely.
But like
late stage capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. But these effects coming into the situation is like at one side, like you said, like when I was listening to you, I was like, oh, that's kind of crazy. Like these creatives are basically banding together and trying to get some agency. And then I'm like, well, they're screwed. Like after what happened last year, like they're toast. Like, will they last the next 4 years? Like I wouldn't bet on it. I would bet against it now. Like, oh, that sucks. Like just seeing like the high ups at Hasbro are just like getting the gun out.
Yep.
They're just like, hey, if any of you guys think that, you can walk out that door immediately.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take on that other company now.
Yeah, it's scary. So by 2022, Paizo had settled into a new normal. The Pathfinder and Starfinder lines were stable, the company was under new day-to-day management, and the unionization staff were working under improved conditions. In September 2022, Lisa Stevens, who had remained Paizo's CEO in a limited capacity, officially retired from the game industry, capping a 35-year career. In her farewell message, she wrote, "After 35 years of making some of the most amazing games, it is time for me to step away and move on to the next chapter in my life." She had been diagnosed with a non-life-threatening but debilitating illness in 2020, which along with the pandemic had gradually led to her hands-off operations. Lisa and Vic Wirtz remained co-owners of Paizo, but all operational control is now fully in the hands of the current leadership team, led by Paizo President Jim Butler as of 2022. Butler is a veteran of TSR and Wizards, and he joined Paizo and took on an executive role to help guide the company. With Eric Mona steering creative direction and a cadre of experienced managers running the show, Paizo's founders confidently stepped back and knowing the company legacy was in good hands. Just as Paizo got its house in order, a storm in the wider RPG world tested the company's resolve. In January 2023, news leaked that Wizards of the Coast was planning a drastic revision to the open game license, the very license that enabled Paizo's existence back in 2008. Wizards, under parent company Hasbro, we don't like Hasbro. They've done some evil things.
Like they sicked the Pinkertons.
Yes.
Like a guy who reviewed Magic the Gathering cards.
Yes.
They are comic book villains.
Yes. And again, for people that don't know, Hasbro owns Magic the Gathering. Yeah. So Wizard intended to introduce a new OGL, often referred to as OGL 1.1 or OGL 2.0, that would revoke the old OGL 1.0A for future products and impose far more restrictive terms on third-party publishers. This sent shockwaves through the tabletop industry. For Paizo, the threat was clear. If the original OGL was revoked or deauthorized, the legality of Pathfinder could be called into question for new releases, and future Pathfinder or Starfinder publications might have to be made under a harsher license or not use D&D 3.5 Foundation at all. It was the very scenario Ryan Dancy had foreseen years ago when he crafted OGL. He attempted an attempt by the IP owners to pull back what was once freely given. Paizo reacted with bold leadership. On January 12, 2023, Paizo published a statement unequivocally rejecting Wizards of the Coast's move. "We believe that any attempt to revoke the OGL 1.0A is unlawful, and we are preparing to defend our games." They revealed that Paizo's lawyers, including the original author of the OGL, who was now Paizo's attorney, were confident that the license could not be revoked. But Paizo didn't stop words of defiance.
Just don't speak to me of the old laws. I was there when they were written. That's got to be baller.
It is.
Because you could just see some attorney on like Hasbro's side, like, look, when this was written, the intention was like, object.
Yeah.
Call myself? Can you just call me? I wrote it.
Don't tell me what my intentions were, bitch. They announced they would spearhead a new open license for RPG community, one that no single company would control. This would be called the Open RPG Creative License. In partnership with other publishers like Kobold Press, Green Ronin, Chaosium, and more, Paizo committed to create a system-agnostic open license that would be irrevocable and owned by an independent nonprofit or law firm, ensuring it could stand the test of time. Paizo essentially rallied the industry to band together, much as its employees had banded together in the union, a recurring theme of unity in the face of adversity. The community's response was massively supported. Paizo's sales spiked in early 2023 as gamers, upset with Wizards of the Coast plans, bought Pathfinder books in solidarity, so much so that Paizo had to do reprints. The Pathfinder 2E core rulebook sold out in January. Within a few weeks, Wizards of the Coast backed down from their OGL revision after huge public backlash. They left OGL 1A in place and even released the D&D 5e system reference document under a Creative Commons license. It was a victory for the tabletop community. Paizo's role in this episode won it a lot of goodwill. Many saw Paizo as standing up for the little guys and for the principle of open gaming. As of 2023, the ORC license is in development with legal drafts circulating for feedback and poised to be released, offering an alternative legal tool for publishers big and small to share game rules. Paizo has stated that all their future products will incorporate the ORC license once it's ready, and they even moved to scrub some legacy D&D terms from Pathfinder in new printings. For example, removing the terms like XP or certain spell names that were inherited from D&D. This ensures that Pathfinder can truly be independent of D&D's IP going forward.
So once again, you're watching the pack leader crashes into the wall, you take over, and you're like, this is awesome. And then, like, they buy him a hover car.
Yeah.
And the hover car races past you, and you're like, what the heck? But then it's a fair game for a while, and you're like, you know what? I can live with him being first if I could just come into second. And then, like, the business owner comes running out of the crowd, jumps in the hover car, grabs the wheel, smashes the wheel into the car, and you're like, what?
And then he pulls out a gun and starts shooting at everybody behind him.
You're like, what is this?
It's greed, man. It's just greed.
You're right. It is greed.
So, 2023 to present. Today, Paizo stands as one of the most influential companies in tabletop role-playing with a unique history of challenges and triumphs. From a small magazine publisher nearly put out of business in 2007, it transformed into the world's second largest RPG publisher, a status it has held for much of the past decade. Its flagship games, Pathfinder 2nd Edition and Starfinder, are both thriving with active communities. Paizo continues to release new adventure paths like Outlaws of Alskanar and Bloodlords for Pathfinder 2 and Drift Crisis meta events for Starfinder, among other supplements. They began playtesting a new remaster of some Pathfinder rules in 2023, partly to further distance the game from D&D's OGL content and to integrate errata and fan feedback. Starfinder 2nd Edition is reported to be on the horizon, with playtests available on their website, which will update the sci-fi fantasy game in line with lessons from Pathfinder 2. The founders of Paizo have stepped into the background, but their story remains a huge part of Paizo's identity. Lisa Stevens and Vic Wirtz, now happily retired, often tending to their farm of alpacas, still own the company but entrust its operation to new leadership. Eric Mona, part of Paizo since the magazine days, is still the publisher and chief creative officer, ensuring that the creative vision that started with Shackled City and Rise of Runelords continues. Jason Bullman, the drafter of the original 3.75 rules, is director of game design, actively crafting new material for Pathfinder. Many other longtime Paizo staff are still on board, now complemented by new hires who grew up as Pathfinder fans. The company's president, Jim Butler, brings experience from TSR, Wizards of the Coast, and has guided Paizo through the recent storm of the OGL incident with steady leadership. There you go.
There's a lot.
It is a lot. And yeah, I mean, this is mainly like a history thing. We didn't really talk about game concepts or anything like that, but I mean, I feel that's, if you've played D&D, you understand Pathfinder and Starfinder
I'm
to
sure
that extent.
sure somebody will be offended by that, but it's largely true. It is. We could go into that later, but this has been a long one.
Yeah.
I feel like Paizo is the kid you always wanted to do well.
Yeah, the one that always kind of struggled, but then you're like, hey, they're doing great.
Yeah, and you legitimately you want them to do well. Like when it comes down to it, they do the right thing.
It's the jerk popular guy's younger brother.
There you go. Yeah, something like that. That makes sense. So I wish them all the best. Like I said, some of the stuff that anyway, we won't go into the negative, but the game systems like Starfinder is something that's on our radar. We have it. We want to play it sometime. It's just that there's so much things and not a lot of time. But I guess I'm hoping that, basically Paizo's around a long time and they can act as like kind of a voice in the industry to do those things. I know largely they probably have a higher head count and maybe they're going to have a higher. So there's this weird thing where like Wizards of the Coast really doesn't have any economic force. It's all like Hasbro pulls from like the Magic the Gathering to give it to them. And so like really if Hasbro starts doing like rough, like Paizo is bigger than Wizards.
Yeah.
It's just not bigger than Hasbro.
Right.
And so like it's kind of one of those things where maybe down the road something interesting's going to happen.
Could you imagine at some point in the future Wizards of the Coast and D&D? I don't think that could happen, but it would be interesting at some point where Wizards of the Coast just becomes we make modules for Pathfinder.
That would be hilarious. I would more likely to believe that at some point in time, Paizo gets the license.
Yeah. That's kind of the way I feel about it too. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
It's too expensive, but
yeah, I think it's just too big. Even if its popularity waned considerably, I still feel it's too big. It's too
someone would come out of nowhere to buy it. It would be an expensive property to buy.
Elon Musk would buy it and call it X and X.
He tried to do something. Oh, he threatened to buy Hasbro.
Yeah, he did.
That I don't want to put this down on the podcast, so I'm not going to officially say this. But I don't think that there are many things in life that, or many things in Minecraft that would make me want to buy a gun and use it. But like that scenario feels like in Minecraft, I would have to make a gun.
Yeah. Like in Minecraft.
Yeah, in Minecraft. So, okay. This is a long podcast. So I think we're going to leave it there. If you guys have, experience with Pathfinder and stuff like that, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you guys love the systems, if you have an opinion about it, or maybe if you don't, if you think they're all like a ripoff of D&D, tell us.
Yeah, tell us why 4th edition is Blessed edition.
Ugh. Whatever. We would love to have those conversations. So anything else to add to the topic?
No, my voice is very dry.
Yeah, this is a long one, guys. So thanks for sticking with us, and we'll talk to you again next time.
Yep, goodbye.